here's the interesting thing about Christians when I talk to them. I could easily just give you the verse and then you go and you see it, and then what you most likely will say is, "Oh, well, that's out of context," or "That's not what he meant by that." It's a struggle sometimes when I debate Christians that I have to educate them on their own religion. You know,
Well, I'm happy to
as
look at a
somebody,
scripture if you have one, but it may be the case that you are taking it out of context or that you are using it
that's
wrongly. So,
well, I mean, that's always the excuse I get because when two people read the same
yeah,
verse,
well, maybe it's true.
although
I don't know. I'd have to see the verse and
But
how you're using it.
but every time that we read, and this is the context of the problem that I usually have when I come in to debate somebody, is that we can both read the same thing and both derive our own meanings from it. However, we can both read John 3:16. We can both say that is exactly what it says without any discussion. It's only when the controversial stuff is brought up that somebody from either side of the aisle on an argument will look at it and read it and interpret it differently.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely things that can be read and interpreted differently in the Bible, but I do think the main things, like as you've admitted, John 3:16 is probably central to Christianity. At least one of the things it is, and
However,
that's pretty
right.
clear, you know.
However, why is it that one verse everybody can agree on, but the rest of it or other parts of it just, you know what I mean? If
People
this is
agree
in
on
the
a lot more. I mean, they disagree too, but I would say most Christians agree on the like core of Christianity.
the Bible is inspired by God. The words from a
Right.
book that that give you instruction on how to live your life, on how to best behave, can be so unclear, and that seems really odd considering that this is something from a higher intelligence than
Yeah.
we.
I mean, so like what
You
what
know?
what would you say is unclear about it?
Oh, just the contradictions, the massive contradictions throughout the Bible. Just from the Gospels themselves on the account of Jesus's life tend to contradict themselves constantly.
Like what, for example?
Leaving out the virgin birth, the the time of day. How about this? The specific time of day when they went to the tomb and what they saw and who was
So
there.
just to take your first one, I mean, you said leaving out the virgin birth. Like
Yeah.
just because
Not
some
all the
mention it and some don't, that's not a contradiction.
Can I say that don't you think that that is a huge part of the religion itself? That that event should have been accounted for in all four gospels?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, but it's also not that surprising that it's not. I mean, especially when you look at the genre of the historical biographies of the day, people didn't typically, like modern biographies, it's very common to take it like from childhood until you're an adult and do the whole life, right? But in ancient biographies, it was much more common to maybe hit, here this and that, and then get right to when the figure that you're discussing, when he did or she did their important things, right? So it's not that out of place in the context of ancient biography, as far as I'm aware.
That four stories that account the life of a person wouldn't mention a pivotal event such as his birth from a virgin?
Sure.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I mean they
Interesting.
mentioned that he's sent by God,
Hmm.
um, but yeah,
Okay. So that just okay. Understood. So then, moving on to the other topic of which I came upon was the time of day that it was when they went to the tomb of Jesus and who was there.
hmm
Some say it was night, some say it was the morning, some say two women were there, some say an angel was there.
I
It,
don't think
you
people
think,
disagree on uh, whether it was night or day as far as when they came to the
oh,
tomb.
see, and
Um,
that's the problem, man. Have you read the Bible cover to cover?
yes, several times.
Okay. And at no point did you ever question why there are certain topics that are talked about concerning the Gospels versus others, that how they don't align.
Yes, I've asked the question and I've looked pretty carefully. And I can pull up some of the verses so that we can actually look at them if you want. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT if that's good with you. I'll ask it. where do the Gospels disagree on the time of day that the empty tomb was discovered? And I'm just gonna say, just
Out
because
of curiosity, are you down to listen to what ChatGPT says and
sure, yeah.
take its? Oh, just curious. Okay.
No, I think it's a good starting off point. At least, I mean, it can be wrong about things, but all right. Well, so this says the Gospels all agree that the tomb was found empty early on Sunday, but they differ slightly in how they describe the time of day. Here's the breakdown using the Extended Version. Now, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. So that's dawn of the first day of the week. Toward the dawn is how it says it. And then very early is Mark. And Luke is at early dawn. John is on the first day of the week, early, while it was still dark. So I don't see any major contradiction here. I mean, I know there are more difficult passages than this, but I mean, I'll just say, like, even the more difficult passages don't seem to rise to the level of me saying that we can't trust this because of, you know, these difficulties that may be able to be resolved somehow if we had maybe more information. And they're not about huge parts of the story, like whether Jesus died or whether there was an empty tomb or anything like that.
Or who was there at the time?
I don't even think there's really contradiction there if you read it carefully.
Can you ask ChatGPT?
Sure. What do you want me to ask it?
Well, I want you to specifically ask it, do the Gospels align with who was at the tomb at the time it was discovered?
I'm trying to think of how to formulate this so I don't lead it too much, but
I mean, what's so wrong with
list from each gospel of who is present at the empty tomb. I'll have to say, and when they are present, because multiple groups could be present at different times, as we see throughout the Gospels. You know, one group could leave and another group could come. You know, so that's why I added that little clause. And when they are present. Gotcha. Okay, we'll see what it says. All right, so Matthew, Mary Magdalene. So who's present? Matthew, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, likely Mary, mother of James. When toward the dawn they come to see the tomb, angel speaks to them. As they run to tell the disciples, Jesus meets them. So, like, you know, you can see here, like, this group leaves, and then Jesus meets them on the road on the way. Mm-hmm. In Mark, it's Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, which would be in agreement with the above, and it adds Salome. And so, again, like, in addition, like, not mentioning Salome in Matthew doesn't contradict Mark. For there to be a contradiction, like for Salome, just for one example, it would have to say only Mary and Mary, the mother of James, or Mary and mother of James and Salome was somewhere else, for example. Like, that would be a contradiction. Mm-hmm. Very
Notice
early.
The time of day when the sun had risen versus the dark story. Also here, by the way. Yeah. The sun has already risen in Mark, but not in, I believe, John it was, where it was still dark.
Did it?
So it's...
Yeah.
So,
and
you know, it's these contradictions that I'm just telling you. You know what I mean? That kind of
right. And again, like if you're at the dawn and the sun has risen and these events are happening over a period of time, I mean, something can change from dark to the sun has risen in 15 minutes. You know, and so I don't see that as such a contradiction that it can't be reconciled as far as like it
Okay.
it undermines the whole thing.
All right. So then we've got a new person, Salome, and then go back. I think you wanted to go back up to Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, this is
And
what we
then
just read. This is
Okay. Gotcha.
Salome. Luke has Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and other women. So this one's interesting because this one makes it clear that not all the women who are present need to be named. And so you have other women with them.
Except Joanna. Except Joanna needs to be named, apparently.
Yeah. And a lot of people take that as meaning that Joanna, like in these ancient biographies and ancient histories, a lot of times when people name a name, it's representative of that is the source for their information. So there's the reason they name names is because the names would be known to their audience. So like when Luke is either orating his gospel or when it's being passed around, people would have recognized, oh, okay, Mary Magdalene, like we know her. She's still around here. This is who I can ask about this story, is why they include names and why they may not include other names. And so, Joanna could have been here all along, but Luke has actually talked to her, got her input on this. And so has recorded her name, for example. Let's see. John, we have Mary Magdalene. Later, Peter and the other disciple. They come when the women tell them, right? Like the women come back, tell them. Peter and the other disciple come. And then later still.
You're kind of glossing over that first, though. Mary Magdalene initially alone, while the other two above there said Mother Mary of James was also there as well. And I find that interesting.
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, you have to, there are ways to reconcile it. So when it says that like the women went to the tomb, it has Mary alone entering the tomb, sitting down, crying, and then Jesus appears to her and she like grabs onto him basically. The other women have left, and that's the women that meet Jesus on the road. At least that's a perfectly plausible reading. Like the Gospels don't give us all the details, but there are many plausible ways that in this, what would have been really a chaos of people and groups moving together and then separating. I still don't see any contradictions here as far as like, oh, that's just simply like not possible,
Luke also says that there's two angels that were there too, where the other Gospels don't even speak about them. So it's
so I think with that one,
suspect.
One of them, and I can chat GPT it possibly too, but one of them some of them describe them as angels, some of them describe them as men. Which meant, saying men in like white robes, which is what it says, is often taken to be angels in Jewish literature. But yes, sometime in one of the stories at least there's one, and then in one of the stories at least there's two. But again, if there are two there,
Yeah.
Oh, does it say it there?
It says right, additional notes: one angel and then two angels, and
right.
And it's funny because Matthew was written first. So that's theologians definitely agree that Matthew the gospel, and yet nothing is talked about angels until Mark and then Luke, and then John goes off on his own.
Mark is generally thought to be written first.
Let's ask ChatGPT that.
Sure, but yeah, just to say, I don't see a contradiction here either, because if there are two angels there, then there is necessarily one angel there as well. Okay. And so, you could just mention the one angel even if there are two. But yes, but let's see. Which gospel is generally taken by scholars to be the earliest? Good with that?
Sure. Written.
Yeah, smart. So I mean, I don't think that's a major point or anything. Although, it does mean that. I mean, there was one angel in both of these, so I don't really even know what. It doesn't seem like a development, even if you had those reversed necessarily. So, and like I said, there are more difficult. Like I could probably give you slightly more difficult contradictions. Even like you're not bringing even the best ones, but still, I don't find them.
What do you think is a stronger
Let me give you a good
contradiction?
one. Let's see, a good one. Where?
Wait, I thought you could just say it off the top of your head.
Well, I could say it, but I can't give you the reference. I mean, you might want to read the actual reference. I can say it. It's basically where Jesus says to his disciples in one place that essentially, I could be paraphrasing here, that they, I believe it's when he says that they shouldn't, that like when he's sending them out, he's saying, don't take a bag, don't take money, don't take this, that, because like people are going to care for you along the way, essentially. And in a different passage that records, supposedly that same event, he said, and he says, don't take a staff either. And then in a different passage that records that same event, Jesus says that, don't take this, don't take that, don't take that, but take a staff. And so it's recorded differently. Let me find out exactly what he says though.
No, but I mean that's so far under my radar that I wouldn't even bother.
Right. I mean,
what does bother me is the account of the all the saints rising from the dead at the time of Jesus's crucifixion.
Yeah, it's in Matthew.
Yeah, can you give me any context for what was going on when that event occurred?
Yeah, I mean, not really. Matthew only mentions it very, very briefly. But yeah, I mean, I take it at face value. I mean, if Jesus resurrected from the dead, I don't have...
Zombies were just resurrected and just walk the earth.
What does it say there are zombies? It says that they were resurrected.
Dead people rose up, right?
But they're alive again, right? Like, they're alive like Lazarus was again.
Meaning that they just resurrected from the dead after being dead for quite a while. I mean, did they just maybe you have a little bit more context than this. You seem to be pretty schooled. Did they resurrect from the dead that they were, or were they all of a sudden back to fresh humans, or what? What was the circumstances of that?
What was you said? Did they resurrect from the dead?
Like were they like deteriorated and decomposed people, or were they just, they came out of their tombs looking like fresh as a daisy?
Technically, Matthew doesn't mention any details, but from what we see from other resurrections in the Gospels that he does give details on, we don't have any reason to think they've had like decaying flesh or anything. Like Lazarus, his sister thought he would stink when he came out, but he came out fine and he lived on.
He was dead for only a couple of days, right? So I mean, I don't know
4 days,
or something.
Well, 4 days is still gonna. 4 days in the ancient world,
sure.
It's gonna
absolutely
do a little bit.
But I'm just talking about people that had probably been dead for a couple of years, maybe even.
Well, again, we just don't know. Like Matthew says, saints, but I mean, they could have been dead a couple of days. Like we just don't know.
Historically speaking, too, to think of something that would happen like that, you'd think there'd be accounts outside of the Bible that would say, "Oh my God, you should have been here that day when dead people all of a sudden rose from their grave and walked around." I mean, did they just go about their lives, or did they?
I assume so.
Make a claim, to make an assertion like that, it's kind of it's a bizarre.
I assume so, but again, like Matthew doesn't give us much details. As far as I know, the account only requires that there at least be two. I mean, it just says saints, or maybe it makes it seem like a few more than that. But I would say, I mean, it could just be a handful of people. So I mean that, and if they died a few days ago, it's a handful of people. Yeah, I mean, it may have been a known thing, perhaps to Jesus's community of followers, but I don't see any reason why it would go far beyond that. I mean, I think people would much more likely just question whether they were dead if it was a few days, or if it's a few years. I mean, I don't know. Like again, like maybe they were so old that people didn't know them anymore. I have no idea. There's just not enough details really to go on. But I could see scenarios where it flies under the radar, maybe.
Yeah. I find it extremely odd though that an event like that isn't accounted by outside sources from the Bible. You know,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah. Again, I
it's
don't.
quite an assertion.
I don't know that we would expect it because we don't know any details, any further details. You know, I mean, it would be one thing if it said like 1,000 people got out of their graves and they all marched up to Pilate's, you
Hmm.
know, a temp or
Residents.
yeah. I mean, that would be
Right.
one thing, but you know, it doesn't
Uh-huh.
really give us all much detail. So,
Yeah. A
and we have a
creepy
ton of
story.
things that aren't recorded in history that I'm sure we think were, or that we discover later that were lost to history for a while. That's pretty amazing. um, or that people just, you know, like we have, for example, like journals of people that we know lived through certain events, and they don't write the event down, even though they keep a regular journal every day, and there's like a huge event that they don't record. So these things can happen as far as people just not recording certain things for
Do
whatever
you think
reason.
that
So
somebody writing in a journal every day and an event such as like 9/11 happens that they possibly wouldn't write that down?
I think there probably were people who didn't write it down. There are probably many people who did write it down, but obviously that was a
Right.
public event that like millions
Yeah.
and millions of people witnessed. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
and I have no idea how many people witnessed the people get it coming out of their tombs. So
It's interesting here too. So you've got Mark writing the biblical account 65 to 70 BC, which is generally speaking about 30 to 40 years after the death of Christ. And we're expected to believe that we can trust these testimonials from people that long after.
yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean,
Okay.
historically speaking, this is extremely soon after the event. So yeah,
Extremely soon, 65 to 70 after 33 BC or AD.
yes, as far as like, I
You
mean,
think
a
that's extremely
ton of what
soon?
we know about ancient history comes from sources that we know are hundreds of years um, after the actual events, and we don't necessarily discount those. I mean, we have to look at
Give me an
them, and
example. What do you give me an example like what?
sure, I'm pretty sure. Let's see. What's a common example that's used in this discussion? What's the earliest attestation to who was it that crossed the Rubicon? Was it Caesar? Caesar crossing the Ru- later sources, not from contemporary eyewitness accounts. While the event happened 49 BCE, the first mention is, I guess, Cicero. Oh wait, no, earliest writing references temporary but indirect. He never mentions it.
Mm-hmm.
Let me scroll down to the summary.
Mm-hmm.
Conclusion: the earliest surviving detailed account is from Lucan 61. So that's, you know, almost 100 years afterward, maybe.
And people agree that this event occurred. I mean, that doesn't sound like a good, reliable source.
And I think the manuscripts may be later. Let me see. So it says the earliest surviving detailed account is from Lucan. What's
Yeah, I'm not even seeing the correlation
earliest
because that's not.
script for Lucan? Right. Okay. So yes, the earliest source is from a guy who lived in 61 to 65 AD.
So after.
But
Yeah.
but we only have copies of that source from the 9th century, so about 800 years after him, and that's very, very common for ancient
Well, my question is
history.
What historical person studier would ever like go? Yeah, that was probably an event that actually occurred. That's not reliable to me.
The crossing of the Rubicon.
Yeah.
Let me see. I mean, I believe that's that's the thing, is most historians accept that. Like, let me see. What do, or let's see, yeah, most historians think the likelihood is that this event happened? Most historians do not doubt that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. The event itself is considered historically certain. So again, like, I mean, because historians use a lot of tools to suss through like what we can glean from these type of sources. And so the main thing I'm saying here is both what we think when we think the Gospels are written down, and the manuscript evidence we have for them are extremely close to the events, especially when compared to other ancient history. And the flip side of that is I think there's a lot of internal evidence that the authors of, and external evidence, that the authors of the Gospels were eyewitnesses to the events. I think the traditional authorship's names are correct, that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote their Gospels. And I think you find all kinds of evidence within the Gospels that root the tradition in a pre-70 AD context, and really right down to the life of Jesus. So,
yes, I'd have to disagree. I mean, that just doesn't wash.
I mean, do you have any reason why you would disagree?
Well, because I don't find that someone could have the memory to recite words that Jesus said decades after his death.
Well, that's the thing is, for one, we know that the disciples were sent out to preach the gospel. And so these things would have been getting codified, like,
codified, not written down, not from illiterate sheep herders, right?
Well, there's not great evidence that they would have been totally illiterate. There was a mix of literacy in the ancient world. I mean, they weren't just like dumb sheep herders. I mean, they were in the Roman Empire. There was access to like literary materials.
Only for those that were of a position to be literate, not those that were just followers of somebody. I don't think that that's ascribed to.
Yeah, but I mean,
disciples.
Jesus had a mix of poor and rich followers. I mean, they could have had access to different things. Like, I don't see any reason to think that they were all just totally illiterate, or that in their time afterward that they couldn't have learned to be illiterate or to be literate, and to or to use, like, a very common practice was to use someone to write down your oral testimony. And so that could be what the Gospels are, and in many ways they give evidence of that, because they do.
And then translate it into Greek.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, it would have been written down straight into Greek most likely. But yeah, I mean, there is evidence that the Gospels,
at the time of his life, it would have been written in Greek.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Roman Empire was completely. No, I mean, it's very likely that Jesus and the disciples would have had a working knowledge of Greek. I mean, Greek was widespread in the Roman Empire.
Ask ChatGPT that.
Sure.
I strongly suspect that that's not the case.
How likely would it have been that Jesus or his followers would have had some or a lot of knowledge of the Greek language? Yeah. So most scholars agree that it's plausible and even likely that Jesus and at least some of his followers had some knowledge of Greek. The degree of fluency is debated. And again,
it's times like these when I suspect that ChatGPT sometimes goes with the person writing the text.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to word this pretty fairly.
I know, but it just seems like every time You throw something in it
Well,
it agrees with you. And I'm not saying that you can't be right. I'm not
uh,
saying that. However, I've had and seen ChatGPT sometimes weave a narrative that goes with the person asking the
sure,
question. You've got a history with this, so
sure. I
you're
mean, it could take into account my history, but I mean,
yeah.
as far as everything I know, like everything that I've typed in here so far is fairly just very well agreed upon. So I mean, I could ask it something different. Like, I mean, look, let's say did Jesus resurrect? I mean, it's not gonna tell me yes, you know. And so, I mean, this is the stuff that we've searched so far is just well agreed upon. Um, and you know, just because you accept that what we've talked about is true so far doesn't necessarily need to mean that that Christianity is true. But I do think it means that some of your objections are not like really well founded, you know, or maybe
Well, let
you
me
could find better objections at the very least.
some verbal Greek familiarity is plausible, but reading, writing Greek fluently is unlikely. And this comes off as that, oh, they have plenty of knowledge of it. And I'm like, going, well, now I'm starting to debate whether or not
Yeah, and I mean,
things typing it
I
are
guess
just
I'm not
going
really
with the narrative.
sure why. I mean, because like there are
Yeah.
levels of fluency, and so yours may be, you know, more talking about like, are they completely fluent? Probably not. And even in Luke's gospel is very good Greek, I think. But the other gospels are, I believe, are pretty well known to be kind of like basic Greek. You know, like it's not as good literarily as Luke maybe. And so that fits with that. And again, like you would have one the chance within 20 years of ministry for these disciples to learn more Greek, especially if they had a small amount of working knowledge of it. They could for sure learn more. And then also when they write their gospels, they could easily be using people who know how to write and read Greek better than them to help write their gospels. And so I don't find it implausible in any way that the gospels would have been written or even spoken oftentimes before it was written down in Greek
Right.
to begin with. And either
And
way, I mean,
you're asserting these actual disciples are the ones and the writers and the authors of these gospels, right?
yes, I think so. I think that's the most plausible.
Does ChatGPT agree with you
I
on that?
doubt ChatGPT agrees with me on that. That'll be a good case study for if my ChatGPT is biased. Did,
Yeah.
here, let's see.
I
Are the
I tell.
traditional authors
What?
of the Gospels accurate? It's one of the most studied and debated issues in biblical scholarship. There's the four names. What scholars say: the Gospels were originally anonymous. The texts don't name their authors internally. So I guess we could go through these points. Like, for one, I would kind of disagree. Like, yes, they don't name their authorship within the text, and it says except for John ambiguously, and that's true. But that doesn't mean that their text wouldn't have been attached or have like a cover attached to them with the name on it. And the earliest full manuscripts we have do, as far as I'm aware, say like this is the gospel according to Luke, John, Mark, Matthew, and they actually never mix up the names and they never give like a different name. And so I think that's interesting. The traditional authorship is possible and uncertain. No conclusive evidence. Gospel analysis. So this isn't really saying a whole lot, I guess.
Well, it's saying something.
Yeah, I mean, it's just saying.
Possibly based on the recollections of Peter stated by Papias,
Right.
considered the earliest. though not certain. The author wrote Acts and showed Greco-Roman literacy style.
Right. So I would say the main case for the traditional authors writing it is, as I mentioned already, the manuscripts, the complete manuscripts that we do have, do, like, when they have they have names on them, even if it's not internal to the writing itself. Secondly, our earliest witnesses, like what was mentioned up there before with Papias, our earliest witnesses record the Gospels by the names that we have them, and these are people who are like geographically dispersed, and writing from different times and places, and wouldn't necessarily be coordinating with each other.
But I mean, look at Matthew itself, 80 to 90 AD. That's a long time from 33.
Right, and again, this is most scholars, right? So I would probably put all of these a bit earlier, but even still, I mean, like, I don't. I think these would probably be pre-70 AD.
All of them, every single one.
Maybe not John,
including John's.
Maybe not John, because John lived a long time, right? But most of these, at least Matthew wouldn't have. So, yeah, and again, like, how do we date these? Like, where do scholars come up with these dates? Well, a big reason that scholars date these as late as they do is because Jesus predicts things like the destruction of the temple in the Gospels, and that happens in 70 AD. And so there's a reasoning that's like, well, if in the text he predicts the event of the destruction of the temple, this would be like predicting 9/11 before it happened. And so therefore, it must be actually written after 70 AD because he couldn't have predicted it. But that's a little bit of a circular reasoning because it assumes from the outset that Christianity isn't true, that prophecy can't happen. So you can't really use that to date the Gospels because you haven't answered the question beforehand of whether it's possible to prophesy, for example.
And yet theological scholars, more educated than both of us, have done that.
Some have, yep, and many haven't, and many have pointed out the circularity of that. And I would also point to evidence within...
You added that part. You definitely added that last sentence there. I think that it's generally accepted.
Well, many scholars have pointed out the circularity of that thought process of dating something after 70 AD.
So what you're doing is you're just choosing to believe them versus...
Well, I look at all of the evidence and
done all the work.
I mean, I just don't think it doesn't make sense to decide from the outset that something must be dated after this, because then miracles are possible, and we know miracles aren't possible, But I would also...
Why would somebody who was a believer in these events and these books want to date it beyond a certain amount time when it would be almost implausible for those writers to write those Gospels?
Well, that's the thing is a lot of scholars are not Christians. So, I mean, many of them would not be believers, and so that's why they assume...
I don't believe that's a fair statement that many of them would not be. I think the general acceptance that these were written when they were is universally accepted by those who do believe and have probably agreed to that, and those that obviously don't, but have said, yeah, from a archaeological standpoint, I could go with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's people on both sides. Like, there are believers who date at least some of the Gospels after 70 or later, but typically, I mean, you're not going to get like a super late date.
Right, Colin, but ChatGPT didn't make up these numbers. These are numbers that are universally accepted. These are the strongest numbers that they have to go with.
Well, they have to be justified. And what I'm telling you is that a lot of the justification comes from certain circular arguments like that prophecy can't be real, and so we have to date it later. which isn't a good argument. Like, I'm more interested in the argument that led to the dating than just the fact that some scholars, or even most scholars, date it to a certain dating. And I would look at the internal evidence that points to an earlier date than 70 AD to at least claim that the traditions behind these must go before 70 AD. And that's getting, geographical locations right that were buried in 70 AD, getting the customs and cultural practices right that were lost after 70 AD. There's all kinds of things like that. And just a... Yeah.
Go ahead. Finish.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, a general... there's all different kinds of things, but, like, I think there's many places where you can see that the gospel writers are interested in preserving the words of Jesus, and that they may have been eyewitnesses to the events.
Right. You don't stray from a lot of other Christians that I sometimes will debate with when it comes to I don't want to say making up your own facts, but kind of like contorting something that's established because it needs to make sense for you.
Well, what fact have I distorted?
Well, you're saying that you've heard other quote unquote theologians say or disagree with what is considered to be when these books were written, and you probably see a problem with something that was written in 90 AD or even John, which is past 100 AD, and going, well, how is it possible that he could either remember or have testimonies from people that were alive during the time of Jesus to record these events, or even be so specific with those events?
Yeah, and it's, again, like, it wouldn't... I don't really see that a whole lot, because, if it's dated 80 to 90, I still don't really think that hurts the case that I'm making a whole lot, because I do think that there's that internal evidence that the traditions within the Gospels are coming from pre-70. And so you could have traditions that are passed down orally that pass certain criteria and show as authentic to pre-70, and if they're written down in 90 by the communities that are carrying that oral tradition, then one, that's just not very far. You could have somebody alive in 90 who met Jesus. You probably would have had people alive in 90 AD who met Jesus. And so it's still not that big of a deal, but I just happen to think it was written
very young.
Right.
And that they would be able to recall and remember these events. And I don't have to tell you that, you could witness a car wreck and there'll be 100 witnesses with 100 different stories on what they saw. And so oral traditions aside, and I don't have to go into the game of telephone, people sometimes can embellish, exaggerate.
Sure, which is where we'd have to get into
theatrical.
Like, one, sure, you can misremember small details, but for a major life-altering event, it's pretty unlikely that you just completely misremember it. And if you have that oral tradition being passed down, then you've preserved something it's not a memory that's being remembered in 90, it's a memory that was remembered in 50 and passed down to 90. And if it shows evidence of being consistent with being spoken in, let's say, 50, then you have good reason to think that it was remembered in 50. It was spoken and remembered in 50. And so you really have evidence from like the 50s rather than the 90s, for example. I forget what your other point there was, but
I'm just saying that you either have a dozen people witnessing a single event and coming away with the same story, which is extremely unlikely, which can be showcased in the game of telephone. And then you've got apparently 4 gospels that leave out certain aspects of Jesus's life, certain events that occur in some and don't occur in others.
Well, these aren't like these. Obviously, we've already talked about these don't match perfectly. Like, yes, that would be suspicious, but yeah, we see a lot of.
It is suspicious.
Well, they don't match perfectly, so it's not suspicious. Like, because if they match perfectly, then we might think that some type of major collusion went on. But when we see that like there are these small differences that can be explained, well, that just kind of fits with what we know about human truthful even testimony, that they can see things from different perspectives, add their own details of what the other person didn't add, but they're not contradictory. And so I think the Gospels hit the right balance of the natural differences that we see in real testimony, but also not, wild differences that can't be explained.
That's an interesting perspective. You would think that God, who doesn't make mistakes, would be able to be clear with the book that he compiled for the believers of his Son to be consistent.
Yeah, I mean,
I just don't know why he would leave up the confusion. It just seems.
I think the Bible is really perfectly clear on what we need to know, which is that God sent his Son.
That's something we absolutely do not agree on.
that God sent his Son into the world to die for our sins, and that if we believe in him, give our allegiance to him, we'll be saved. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty clear,
Which is a weird, bad writing plot, right? I mean, as plots
is it?
Go,
I think it's great.
No, because it's like,
isn't that a little subjective, though?
No. I'm looking at it from a completely objective. Like, if I were to go to a movie and I saw this plot line play out, I would go, so God has sent a bill to man for a debt they could never pay off. And the only way, I'm going to sound like Matt Dillahunty here, the only way for them to pay off that debt is for him to sacrifice himself for this loophole that what's the reason for blood to be spilled? Why can't God just go, you know what? I'm the one making the rules. Man's forgiven.
Yeah. I mean, there's different reasons. I would say, number one, I mean, I've gone to see this story in the theaters, saw The Passion of the Christ, and I cried. So I think it's a good story, and millions of Christians,
it has a happy
probably
ending.
Billions of Christians think it's a good story. And so I do think there's a little bit of subjectivity there. And obviously how you describe it is going to, and I think how the Bible describes it, obviously the Bible doesn't describe it as like, oh, God needs to find a loophole. I mean, the Bible describes it as God came to us, like, because he loves us, to give his life, to teach us the way, to be holy.
That doesn't sound bizarre. That doesn't sound weird to you.
Well, it's not. What I'm saying is it's an act of love, not an act of, like, technicality. Like,
okay, but can I give you a plot hole?
Sure.
Judas.
Mm-hmm.
Judas is a plot hole because Judas is the one that starts this whole fucking thing off, and yet he's the villain. It's required for him to betray Jesus, and instead of looking at him as the saint he would have been to do that, to pay that debt that God apparently wanted to forgive man for, he's the absolute worst person in the Bible according to the Gospels.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what the point is. Like Jesus said of...
You don't know what the point of the plot hole is? Meaning that there's an inconsistency with treating somebody as a villain who was supposed to be the one that unlocked this whole thing?
Yeah, so Jesus, like, talks about Judas, and he says that, like, the Son of Man, referring to himself, goes as it's written of him, meaning that he'll be killed, crucified. But woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man, essentially. And so what Jesus is saying there is...
However, if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't get the sacrifice that God wanted to sacrifice you.
Well, I mean, Jesus was going to die. He was going to be killed by humans because we were always going to reject the Messiah. But, I mean, Judas had free will not to betray him.
I'm lost.
I guess I don't see the plot hole as far as where there would be a logical contradiction.
He was used as a plot device. Judas was used as a plot device. If it wasn't for Judas, this whole thing wouldn't have happened.
I mean, somebody else would have turned in Jesus, or somebody would have crucified Jesus, I believe. But I mean, that is how it ended up happening. Somebody as close to him,
maybe another disciple, maybe Peter.
We have no. I mean, I think that Peter was faithful to Jesus. I don't think so, but we just don't know.
Thomas wasn't.
What I know is that Jesus said that he was going to go as it's written of him. So, he was going to be crucified because that's what the prophecy said. But he doesn't give any indication that Judas had to do that. In fact, it wouldn't be just, that's right. It wouldn't be just to say, like, woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man if there was no choice for him. So there was still free will. And I think, it shows a theme that runs throughout the Bible, which is that, like, when human beings do evil, God can still work it for good. And so Judas chose to do this evil, but God incorporated that within his plan to bring out this redemption for human beings. I don't really see the plot hole in that, and I also find it to be a good, compelling story.
I can't. The perspective that you have, I can't even wrap my head around.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah, no,
I don't.
I totally get it.
I don't understand. The Bible is riddled with these types of weird, must be 12, must be 30, must be 3 days, must be 30 days, must be 40 days. There's all these cyclical numbers and things that happen that just, it occurs to me that this is something that the Bible does.
I'm not even sure what you're referring to there.
Well, I'm just talking about the lazy writing. It's just, it's always lazy writing.
I think all the events happened, and I think they read that way. I'm not sure. I don't know what you're talking about. The 12, the 30.
Cannot. When you say because there's replete throughout the Bible of these numbers of 12,
sure,
of 30, of 40 days. You know what I mean? It just occurs to me that somebody's copying off of somebody else, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And then, as we get to the end of the Bible itself, we're just replete with these cyclical, redundant passages that double down on themselves. Does any of that make sense to you? Or
I don't find any issue with it, for one, because numbers can be symbolic throughout the Bible and all types of writing, and have meaning beyond just the number. But also, like, let's say Jesus fasted for 40 days. Well, is that because...
How long did it rain in Noah's flood?
Right. So is that because somebody had bad writing and made up the 40-day fast? Or did he do the 40-day fast to represent a time in the wilderness like the Israelites had 40 years in the wilderness? I think that's a cool parallel. Like, I think, like, Jesus was the new Israel that, instead of failing their mission given to them by God, Jesus was fulfilling his mission. He actually made it through the wilderness, made it through the temptation. So that's why he does 40 days. I just find these things to make the Gospels more beautiful and compelling.
Yeah, I find it to be even more confusing, especially the fact that we try and live our lives according to those who lived 2,000 years ago. It's so far removed from our understanding and our reality and our technology that you should never be compelled to live your life as if it was from an era that you couldn't even identify with.
You don't think there's anything in, like, Jesus' teaching that could be applied today as easily as back then?
According to the Bible, he said things which I don't believe he said, and that's just from somebody who has a different perspective. It doesn't make sense to me. Somebody comes along after you read the Old Testament and says, my father, the same guy from the Old Testament, now thinks this. And it's a massive character flip. The God of the Old Testament versus the God of the New Testament has a bipolar schizophrenic side because it's not the same deity.
Yeah, I just
entity.
Don't agree. I think you can see, like, the heart of Jesus all throughout the Old Testament in the God that Israel serves there.
You see genocide upon genocide in the Old Testament, and then all of a sudden in the New Testament it's like flowers and daisies, and I don't understand why.
I would say that's accurate. I think, like, let's say in the Old Testament you have God wiping out the world that had become evil in the flood. In the New Testament you have a Jesus who will come back and cast all of the wicked into the lake of fire. I think That seems pretty consistent to me. But you also have a God in the Old
Second
Testament.
genocide.
You also have a God in the Old Testament who, when people repent, he relents, like whether they're his people or a different people. And the same with Jesus. He
And how
dies
does
for
he
the whole
treat?
world.
How does he treat the most dedicated, loyal servant in the Old Testament?
Who, God?
Yeah.
Who
How does he? How does he?
who would be
How
the
does
most
he
dedicated,
treat?
loyal servant?
Oh, that's say inarguably Job.
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
arguable for sure.
So how do you arguable? I mean, he's the one that picked him out himself.
But so, I mean, even that I think is consistent. Like Job went through a period of terrible suffering, and at the end was redeemed, and it even talks about his redeemer. I mean, Jesus, the same with him. He went through a terrible suffering, and Jesus even did it willingly. Died on the cross, and then is raised after that. And so, I mean, as far as
And
the
that's
character
looked
of
at
God, there,
you look at that in a positive view. That's a positive thing.
yes,
That your most loyal servant should go through hell and at the other end still have the same faith that they had before the event. There's no change.
I think for
in Job.
Job, there's an even
There's no
greater
change in Job.
reliance on God.
If anything, I think Job feels betrayed, like Jesus would be towards Judas, on, listen, I'm your guy. I'm the guy who believes in you and has followed you and lives by your code. And therefore you feel that I should go through this tribulation in order to, I guess the best word, to codify my faith in you. And even when Job asks him, hey, why'd you do this to me? And God just goes, hey, man up.
Yeah, I mean, well,
You know?
you said that you feel like Job would feel that way, but that's not what we read Job feeling like. I mean, we see
Well,
Job.
at the end of the story, he's like, hey, why did you put me through this? I mean, that's not fair.
Sure, yeah.
Does he not?
I mean, he has questions,
And then
but he submits to God, right?
But God at the same time just goes, you got to man the fuck up. This is the way it is. You know, Lord giveth, Lord taketh away, and then rewards him with another family. Can I ask you something?
Sure.
What happened to those first sons and daughters, those children? Were they just murdered for as a pawn game? You know what I mean? And like their lives meant nothing. And then God's like, hey, but I know you probably love those kids, but I'm going to give you even better kids.
Well, their
And
lives
shit.
definitely meant something. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been tragic. And there's no indication that God enjoyed
do you
seeing
understand
his
that they were
children die.
used? But they were used as children, as pawns in this fucking game of what I would call like the literal plot of Trading Places.
I've never seen Trading Places, I don't think, but
Oh, okay.
but
Okay. All right.
yeah, I mean, God has the right
Two
over.
people make a bet on, let's see how loyal this is. You know what I mean?
Uh,
It's a bet. It's a bet on the life of a man with the weight of the death of his children.
yeah, and
Part of
I mean, I'm sure the suffering was terrible for Job, and I'm sure, like anybody who goes through suffering,
I bet his kids suffered more.
I'm sure, like anybody who goes through suffering and comes out on the other side, he had both a sense that he wished that hadn't happened and a sense that good came out of it. Because I mean, it's not like you would not want want your new family.
What good came out of it?
Well, he did receive 10 more children. I mean, that is a good.
What about the ones that are dead?
But
Doesn't that matter?
right. But in the Christian worldview, they're not just lost forever. Like Job will be with his first children again, and he'll be with his new children forever.
Okay, so now we're playing the long game. How did those children feel that their lives were nothing more than an extension of the bet, an extension of something to be sacrificed for a bet? I mean, that doesn't put any value on their lives whatsoever. They did nothing.
If we're looking at this from an internal point of view, that this is true, then I think the perspective of those children, honestly, let's say they're righteous like Job was righteous, and they go to be with God after they die. Then their perspective is, I'm with God now. The story of my father's grief at my death has been forever recorded, has done good in his life. He's stayed faithful. I'm proud of him. He's happy again with, new children, and has had everything restored to him. And people for generations get to read this story and see like the goodness of God.
Colin,
I mean, so
Colin,
I don't think they're wronged in that scenario.
Colin, do you have children?
I do.
And if they were sacrificed, as gross as that sounds, would their memory be good enough for you to go, well, you know what? At least I know where my faith stands. I mean, are you engaging with the problem with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying, again, just like Job, I'm not saying that wouldn't cause horrible suffering and, like Job, questioning of God. But I also pray that, like Job, that wouldn't be the end of my faith, and that I could see that God gives and God takes away, and that he has a right to do that.
You have children, Colin, right?
Right.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah, I can imagine it.
And that,
I mean, not fully, I'm sure.
You're engaging with that. You're engaging with that feeling of what it would be like to lose the children that you currently have, and then God just blessing you with more. I mean, they're not fucking toys. They're not something that's
right, but
easily to.
There's nothing in the text that says that they, were replaceable. I think one interesting part of the text of Job is that when Job loses everything that he has, it literally lists like the quantity of things that he has and loses. It says he has this many sheep, this many that, this many that, and then it says he has 10 children, and they all die like on the same day, right? But at the end of the story, you see that Job gets double everything. So he gets double the sheep he had, double the cows he had, double everything. But when it comes to his children, he doesn't get double the children. He just gets the same number of children back. And I think one thing you can draw from that is that these children aren't replacing the other children. Otherwise, he'd get double the children. He has double the children because the children who died, and in the Christian worldview, children who die, they're not lost forever. Anyone who dies is not lost forever, particularly if they have a righteous faith in Jesus Christ. So, yeah, I mean, I just think, I think the story of Job is beautiful, and that I think that story will help me one day to, well, hopefully not one day, but if I had to go through something like that, I think that story would help me keep my faith in God, rather than, be some evil plot that I, couldn't wrap my brain around.
It's difficult to hear somebody say that. It really is. It's. It reaffirms my conviction and my belief that the religion as a whole is just, it's a scar on humanity. I don't know. See, I was indoctrinated when I was a child because I had no fucking choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the one asking questions, especially on situations like Job, where I was told, Lord works in mysterious ways, don't question your faith, and all that stuff. And it got to a point where I was just like, I can't do this. So, I mean, I left fairly early, even when at the protest of my mom. And she still believes, and she still thinks that I'm just somebody who eventually will come back to this stuff. But I have never understood. I am completely baffled how you can't read this with a critical mind and not understand and expose it for how nasty and gross.
All I would say is, yes, of course, I can look at it with a critical eye. I can say, oh, that doesn't seem very fair. But that's exactly what Job's saying. Like, the whole point of Job is to go through that wrestling of, this doesn't seem right, this isn't fair. Because that's something we will feel in life. And I think the point of Job is to help us through those feelings. And so, I mean, yeah, I don't see it as like an evil work,
It's replete with evilness, though. God as a character, if you were to follow that logic and that conviction, you'd be in jail in a day.
What do you mean?
If you looked at somebody and thought they were wicked and you did what God would do, you would be in jail. We as a society do not hold the same values as that
Well, it
theological
depends. I mean,
community.
if somebody was so wicked that, let's say, they were like shooting up a
Well,
mall that I was
we
in and I
both
killed them, then
right,
I would be
right.
celebrated for killing them.
However, we both know high profile wicked people that exist on this planet currently, right?
Right.
Do we feel it necessary to go and smite them because of their wickedness though?
I mean, some people would be justifiably smited. I mean, yeah. I mean, I can think of wicked people who I believe, like, probably, if given the opportunity, I don't see why
Mhm.
someone shouldn't kill them.
Are you advocating for the murder of people?
Well, I mean, let me put it this way.
I
Like,
just come on.
let me put it this way. In Nazi Germany, if given the chance to kill Hitler, do you think you
Mhm.
should or do you think you shouldn't? At the height of concentration camps and everything.
Right. Okay. At the height of concentration camps, when he had declared war on most nations in Europe, absolutely.
Right. So it's
The
not a
man needs to
ridiculous
die,
position to
of course.
think that some people
Right,
deserve
right, right. But
death for being
right,
wicked.
right. But do you vocally advocate for the murder of people who you deem wicked, though?
No, not who I just deem wicked.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, but that's where you and God would probably differentiate, where he sees what should die or not die and then makes that sweeping decision.
Well, God sees truly who is wicked. Like,
Well, okay.
I can really only ever see who seems wicked. Like, really, I mean,
Right.
even if it seems
Right.
very, very sure, there's
Right.
still an element there where God can really see the heart and determine who is wicked and who's not. And even beyond that, like, God gives life. Like, God can, like Job says, like, God gives and God has the right to take away. So, I mean, there can be innocent life that God ends because, again, from the Christian perspective, the life isn't necessarily ending forever, it's going to be with God potentially. So,
Potentially.
yeah.
So those that God just murders, as far as like the genocide under the flood, did those people, what happened, ended up with their souls?
I can't say for sure. I mean,
You
I
don't
wouldn't be
know.
surprised if
Okay.
some of them went to hell or will be in hell.
Uh-huh. Not the babies, of course, not the children.
I'm not sure. I tend to think that no, they
You're
won't
not
be.
sure. The babies are the children or the infants at the time of the flood. You don't know if they would have gone to
Yeah,
hell
I'm
or
saying
not.
I
Like
tend to
something,
think they won't.
okay, but you're not sure.
Well, obviously, I can't know for sure.
Yeah. Right. Hmm. Yeah. Once again, I go through life baffled why there are those that want to believe and put their faith in something that has a lot of judgment on others, especially those that, as Jesus definitely pointed out, should be protected. There's a lot of Christians and evangelicals that have a clear, defining opinion on those people that, in my opinion, should be protected.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can't
Yeah.
speak for. I'm sure the evangelical voting base,
Right.
that whole thing. I'm sure they get plenty of things
Mhm.
wrong. I mean, but I don't think that
Yeah.
bears really on the truth of Christianity.
And they use the Bible that you use as a source of faith in order to justify that as well, because they say, and they cite scripture and chapter and all of that of where they feel that interpretation applies to people living today and marginalized people today and people of color today.
Sure.
It's it, it's almost as if somebody could say, fundamentally, I'm a Nazi, but I don't believe in harming Jews anymore, but I still adhere to all the other things that the Nazi Party is about. And you sometimes will go, then why are you part of that organization? Because it clearly has it clearly comes with baggage. Do you know what I mean?
Uh huh.
That word alone, you know, and I'm just making a correlation. When I hear somebody say I'm a Christian, there's so much baggage that comes with that, especially the way that they judge, interpret, feel,
Yeah.
vote, all of those things. There's a funny meme I saw where there's a Bible challenge where let's see how far it would take you to be arrested following the Bible letter by letter,
Uh-huh.
you know. So it's just I find the book to be oddly enough still popular considering its content.
Yeah. I think it's an awesome book. Obviously there are difficult parts of it. But I think the whole overarching narrative framework of it is pretty awesome. So, and obviously, yes, people can take it in many different ways. Like I said, I do believe there is a core there that is very well agreed upon by all Christians. Obviously, when you get to how to apply morality of the Bible to very specific, unique, maybe the first time we've ever experienced them in history type situations, yeah, you're going to get disagreement from Christians, and some of them are going to handle it honestly in a way that just goes against the Bible. But yeah, I guess I would say like I wouldn't take that and necessarily say that therefore there can't be anything there worth grabbing onto or helping guide you through life or whatever it may be. So I would just try and look at what that core is and see if there's a truth there, however people may be misusing it.
And then when you read a part that's extremely controversial or makes you go, what the heck is going on in this thing? Are they to just glaze past it?
No, I've tried to look pretty deeply into some things that are troublesome. We just looked at
misogyny. The misogyny. It's just riddled with how women are nothing more than property.
what doesn't say? Women are made in the image of God, so that's a pretty huge thing. That's one unique to human beings in general in the Bible is being made in the image of God, and really that's been the foundation for the West, especially's high view of humanity and their value, their worthiness of being protected, and that's extended to females too in the Bible. So
being protected, that they should be protected.
Sure.
But that's not what it says. It doesn't say protection. It says owner, their property. That they should be looking to find somebody who's going to provide them, and it's like, is
it
that
doesn't
something
say
you would want
it doesn't say
if
women
you
are
had a
property, and it
dog?
doesn't say that they should be looking for somebody who's going to provide for them either. I don't think that's in the Bible.
I don't even want to go into that one. I just women, shut your mouths. Ask your husband if you don't understand something. For a woman or a little girl to read passages in that Bible, it takes away and strips them of their identity,
Yeah.
their sense of
Well, you have
self-confidence.
misquoted it to make it seem worse than it is a little bit there. It doesn't say shut your mouths, right?
What? Be quiet?
Right.
Is that a better term? Be quiet?
Sure, yeah, and that can be said.
Okay.
That doesn't have to be said with like vitriol.
Well, it doesn't mean the same thing. It doesn't mean the same thing.
It doesn't carry the same malevolence.
My language may be, well, it kind of does. It kind of does. Yeah, I may have a little bit of a theatrical way of saying it, but at the same time, the core issue is still there, and that I would hesitate to think that if I ever had children, I would ever want them to read something as vulgar as that to make them go, yeah, guess what? The man makes the decisions. You just follow him.
Well, it doesn't say that either. You're saying a lot of things that the Bible doesn't say.
Come on, man. We can both agree that the place and purpose of women in the Bible is not one of a leadership role.
Is it not? You literally have, like, first person that comes to mind, you have Deborah, who was a judge of Israel. She led Israel. She led Israel in battle.
You've given me one example.
Okay, well, that one was the first one off the top of my head. How about Junia, who was an apostle?
Apostle to Jesus?
Yes, not one of the 12, but there were apostles outside of the 12, right? An
That's not a
apostle is a
leadership
bit.
role.
An apostle
that's not
isn't a leadership role.
No,
An apostle
no.
is a leadership role.
You know, I've never heard of this person. I've read the Bible too. I've never heard of this
Oh,
person.
she's
Does she get,
mentioned.
like,
It's a small
does she
mention,
get?
sure, but she's an apostle.
Okay, so then that. Whereas Thomas and Peter, they've got flowing examples of
Well,
their
no,
leadership
there are also
qualities.
many of the 12 disciples. We only get their names, and so no, that's not the case either. There are members of the 12 apostles that we only get their names, and the same with Junia, the female apostle. So I'm just saying that there are plenty of examples of women, both in the Gospels and in the early church, who were leaders and did incredible things and were highly valued in the Christian community. In fact, it was a common criticism of Christianity that it had so many slaves and women making up its populace in the early church. Like, that was looked down on by the rest of the world.
What was looked down on?
The fact that there were so many slaves and women who wanted and who became Christians. And the reason so many slaves and so many women would want to become Christians in the ancient world is because they were treated better than the culture around them, much better within Christianity than without.
A slave under a Christian umbrella was treated better.
Yes, much, if not set free.
But okay, but still a slave.
Well, I mean, we see slaves set free in the Bible, and we see Paul saying that if a slave can receive their freedom, then he should do it.
How many people are willing to just give up the person that they own as a property?
Well, we know Paul encouraged one to do it, and so.
Well, not in his letters to the Ephesians, he literally says, "Obey your masters as you would Christ, with fear and loyalty."
Right, and then he tells the masters to not be harsh with their slaves because they also have a master in heaven. He's much harsher actually with the master than with the slave.
Do you think well, not really, because he's telling the slave to stay a slave. But do you think the master would listen to somebody telling them how to treat their property?
Sure. I mean, for one, slaves were not only considered property in the ancient world. Like they were seen as human beings. They're not property alone. Like they did have some rights given to them. Like you couldn't just kill them for anything.
Oh no, as long as they didn't die, you could do whatever the fuck you wanted, though.
So you're talking about
right?
You're going back to like Leviticus. I'm talking about like in the first century in Paul's time.
So the just so I understand correctly, the policies on slavery in the New Testament are different from the Old?
Yeah, I mean, I would say slightly. There's definitely a new view on slavery as far as what Jesus is.
What's a new view on owning people as property?
Well, there's a new view as far as Jesus has united all people within himself who believe in him, and therefore,
it's weird
like Paul says, there's no such thing as slave or free when it comes to faith in Jesus, and so some of those distinctions
except for the people that own those people.
It also says right after that there's no man or woman. Are we all going to start being gender nonconformity now?
No, and exactly. So it's not saying that these things don't exist anymore. That would have been like an absurd claim to say, like, you know what, slavery as an institute, it just doesn't exist anymore.
Colin, I mean, God and Jesus take definitive stands on other things like lying, cheating, stealing, murder, and yet this one they're like, I'm okay.
Well, like I said, like we see Paul say that if a slave can get their freedom, he should get it, and he strongly encourages a slave owner to release his slave too in the letter.
And yet he takes such a strong stance on dudes and not eating shellfish and not wearing clothes.
We can eat shellfish, but I totally agree with Paul that men should not have sex with men, though.
Yeah, exactly. He takes such a strong stance on that.
Right, that's good. We need that.
But he can't say no slavery. In fact, he actually says it's okay to have slaves. Why is that, Colin?
Well, one, because I mean, slavery, it was like a ubiquitous institution, and you could treat your slaves well. And there were some instances in which a slave-master relationship could be beneficial to a slave. And so it's not.
Sorry to interrupt you,
It
but
does-
you're not
so-
engaging with his question.
All right, what was your question? Maybe I'm missing it.
Why?
Why would God, who took such harsh stances on these other seemingly minuscule problems,
Homosexuality is not a
allow-
minuscule
it-
problem. I mean, look at our culture today.
It absolutely is. It has nothing
it's
to
a
do
big-
with anyone.
it's a big
between
problem.
It's between two consenting adults, and you only believe it's a problem because your book says it's a problem.
No, I
If
believe
your
it's a problem
book
because
didn't
it's
say it would-
unnatural and it
if
leads
your
to
book didn't
moral
say-
decay in our
no,
society.
It's not unnatural. Over 1,400
It's very
different
unnatural.
species. No, over what does natural mean? Natural means found in nature without engagement of humans. It is found in over 1,400 different species in the wild, some of which engage in explicitly only homosexual intercourse.
And
It is by no means unnatural.
so does that mean
at
that it's
any
okay for
point in
humans to
time.
do?
He's only making a
I'm not
point
saying
that
it's okay. I'm attacking your point where you said it's unnatural.
Well, yeah, I think it's
Can we
it's
get back-
why
it's,
wouldn't-
it's unnatural
Can we
as
get
far
back to
as
the original
the
question?
as far as
Can
the design, or even if you don't believe in any design, the evolution of human beings. Like our
Colin, why do
default
prostates exist?
our
why do
default is to
prostates
be
exist?
in a
No,
female
why do
male
prostates
relationship.
exist?